Every species in the known galaxy had a word for it. The Vorkai called it Dreshka, the Death Shadow. The Pelari called it the Unmerciful. The Conclave's own scientific registry listed it under a 17-syllable classification that basically translated to do not approach, do not engage, do not make eye contact, do not breathe loudly in its general direction. Humans called it a big cat. Technically, the Raveth was not a cat. It was 600 kilograms of pure apex predator, native to the jungle moons of Sector 9 Kale, with 4 retractable claws on each of its 6 limbs, a hide that had stopped low-caliber pulse rounds in 3 documented incidents, and a jaw pressure that xenobiologists had measured, once very carefully from a significant distance, at roughly the same force as a hydraulic industrial press. No known species had ever successfully approached a wild Raveth and lived to submit a report. That was the scientific consensus. Peer-reviewed, widely accepted. Sergeant Dara Cole had not read the report. Or rather, she had read it, filed it somewhere in the back of her mind next to regulation boot polish intervals and mandatory sensitivity briefings, and then proceeded to do what she always did with information that conflicted with what she was currently observing with her own 2 eyes. She ignored it. The forward operating base on Kale, 7 had been established 6 weeks ago. Jungle terrain, permanent cloud cover, humidity that made your gear feel like it was slowly dissolving. The kind of posting nobody volunteered for, and everybody complained about until they stopped noticing the complaints. The Raveth had shown up on day 9. It had come out of the tree line at 0340, silent for something its size, and positioned itself at the edge of the perimeter lighting with the specific, unhurried confidence of a creature that had never once in its evolutionary history needed to consider whether something might eat it first. Every sensor lit up. Every soldier on watch froze. The creature snarled. It was the kind of sound that didn't just travel through air. It traveled through bone, through instinct, through every layer of civilized behavior evolution had spent millennia carefully constructing, stripping it all back down to one single ancient message. Run. 12 soldiers heard that message. 11 of them took a step backward. Sergeant Dara Cole took a step forward. She tilted her head slightly, looked at the creature the way you look at something that is trying very hard to seem more frightening than it actually is. Hey, she said quietly. The Raveth snarled again, louder. She took another step. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Private Reyes, on watch duty at Post 3, later said it was the most terrifying 11 seconds of his entire military career, including the time a Vorkai raiding party had fired on their convoy from 3 directions simultaneously. At least the Vorkai, he said, had been something they trained for. Nobody trained for this. The Raveth was close enough now that Dara could see the individual muscles shifting beneath its hide. Coiled, loaded, a biological weapon with 6 limbs and absolutely 0 patience. Its eyes caught the perimeter lighting and reflected it back in 2 burning amber points that did not blink and did not look away. It snarled a 3rd time. Dara stopped walking. Not because she was afraid. At least, not entirely because she was afraid. She stopped because she was watching it the way she watched everything that she didn't yet understand. Carefully. Completely. The way her grandfather had taught her to watch the strays that wandered into his yard back home. The ones that came in low and bristled, all teeth and noise, because they had been hurt enough times to decide that the best defense was making the world believe they didn't need anything from it. She recognized the performance. She had seen it before, not on alien predators with 6 limbs and industrial-pressed jaw strength. On people. Dara. Lieutenant Harwick's voice came through her earpiece, tight and controlled in the way that meant he was actively fighting the urge to shout. Dara, step back from the animal. It's not attacking, she said. It's snarling. Snarling isn't attacking. Snarling is talking. A pause. Then, it is absolutely not talking. She pulled the earpiece out and put it in her chest pocket. Behind her, she heard someone mutter something that was probably a prayer. She crouched down, slowly, deliberately, making herself smaller, lowering her center of gravity, dropping below the creature's outline, not as submission, but as a question, a shift in the dynamic. Something that said, "I am not challenging you," without saying, "I am afraid of you." The Raveth's snarling cut off mid-sound. It was a small change, but in the absolute silence of the Kale 7 jungle at 0340, a small change was enormous. The creature's head tilted, just slightly. The amber eyes blinked, once slowly, and something in its posture shifted in a way that none of the 12 soldiers watching could have precisely described, but all of them felt. It was confused, not by Dara's bravery or her stillness, or the fact that she hadn't run. It was confused because she was looking at it differently than anything had ever looked at it before. Not with fear, not with aggression. With interest, Dara reached slowly into her jacket pocket, pulled out what she had there. A wrapped piece of protein ration, dense, slightly smoky, the kind that smelled stronger than it tasted. She unwrapped it with the slow, deliberate movements of someone defusing something very old and very delicate. She placed it on the ground in front of her. Then she waited. The Raveth stared at her. She stared back. 20 seconds passed. 30. The jungle around them held its breath. Then one careful, enormous paw moved forward. Then another. The creature lowered its massive head toward the ration, eyes still locked on Dara's face, still looking for the trap, still waiting for the moment this turned into every other encounter with something bipedal and unpredictable. The trap didn't come. The ration disappeared in one bite. The Raveth lifted its head, looked at her. Something shifted deep in those amber eyes, not warmth, not yet, not anything so simple, but the first fragile, unmistakable absence of hostility. Dara exhaled slowly. "Yeah," she said softly. "Thought so." She reached out her hand. Every xenobiologist in the Conclave would have told her not to do it. Every survival manual ever written for Sector 9 Kale would have told her not to do it. 11 soldiers standing behind her were absolutely, silently, desperately telling her not to do it. Dara did it anyway. Her hand moved slowly, palm down, fingers loose. The universal posture of something that is not a threat, though whether the Raveth understood universal postures was admittedly an open question. The creature watched her hand the way a storm watches a coastline. Calculating, patient, inevitable. Her fingers were 18 inches away, then 12, then 6. The Raveth's upper lip pulled back. Not a full snarl, something smaller, a warning, the biological equivalent of "I haven't decided yet." Its breath hit her hand in a hot, humid wave that smelled like jungle floor and raw protein and something ancient underneath it all. Dara didn't pull back. She stayed exactly where she was, hand extended, and waited with the specific brand of patience that had gotten her into trouble her entire life, the kind that looked, to outside observers, indistinguishable from stubbornness. Her grandfather had called it a gift. Her commanding officers had called it a disciplinary issue. Right now it was all she had. Contact, not her reaching forward. The Raveth moving toward her. Its nose, wide, dark, ridged with sensory tissue that xenobiologists had classified as 60 times more sensitive than any human equivalent, pressed against her knuckles. 1 second, 2, then it pulled back, looked at her hand, moved forward again. Behind her, Private Reyes made a sound that was not quite a word. Lieutenant Harwick, watching through the security feed from inside the base, had stopped breathing entirely. The base medical officer had pulled up an emergency trauma protocol on her tablet and then realized she had absolutely no relevant entry for soldier eaten by apex predator during unauthorized first contact. She left the protocol open anyway. Dara turned her hand over slowly. Palm up now. Completely open. Everything visible. No threat, no trick, no trap. The Raveth stared at her palm for a long moment. Then it did something that would later be reviewed, frame by frame, at least a dozen times by people who still weren't entirely sure they believed what they were seeing. It pushed the top of its enormous head into her hand. Not gently, the way a 600-kilogram apex predator does everything, with absolute, total commitment, nearly knocking her sideways. Dara planted her feet, held her ground, and scratched it, behind the ear, in the spot that her fingers found instinctively, the way you find it on any creature that has ears and feelings and a complicated relationship with whether it deserves kindness. The Raveth made a sound. Low, resonant, nothing like the snarl. Something almost like the opposite. Reyes found his voice first. Is it, he said slowly, is it purring? Dara said nothing. She was too busy paying attention to something else. Something she had noticed in the last 30 seconds that nobody else had seen yet. Something that changed everything about why the Raveth had come to the perimeter in the first place. It wasn't alone. That was the thing nobody else had seen. That was what Dara had noticed in the last 30 seconds, while everyone behind her was busy processing the impossible image of an apex predator accepting ear scratches from a human sergeant. She had seen the tree line move, not the wind, not the jungle settling. Something deliberate, something small, low to the ground, trying very hard to stay hidden, and not entirely succeeding. She kept her hand moving, kept her posture loose, kept her breathing slow, and even, "Don't move," she said quietly, calmly, the way you speak when you don't want anyone to know how fast your heart is going. "Already not moving," Reyes whispered. "Not you." She paused. Nobody turn on the perimeter floods. Harwick's voice crackled through her discarded earpiece, loud enough to carry. "Cole, what are you?" The Raveth's head snapped up at the sound. Every muscle reloaded instantly. The purring stopped like a switch had been thrown. "Harwick," Dara said very quietly and very clearly, "if you finish that sentence, I will personally disassemble every speaker on this base with my bare hands." Silence. The Raveth's muscles held for 3 long seconds. Then, slowly, watching Dara's face the entire time, reading her the way it had been reading her since the moment she stepped forward, it settled again. She exhaled, went back to scratching. The tree line moved again, closer this time. She saw it properly now, low to the ground, moving in the hesitant, stop-start way of something that desperately wants to approach and desperately doesn't trust itself to. Half the size of the adult. Same hide pattern, same 6 limbs, same amber eyes, though on this one they were wider, rounder, full of the specific expression that needed no translation across any species barrier in the galaxy. A juvenile. The Alpha hadn't come to the perimeter to investigate the base. It had come because something had followed it that shouldn't have. Something young and curious and completely without the survival sense that would have kept it in the deep jungle where it belonged. Something that had gotten too close to the perimeter lighting and then frozen, caught between the instinct to run and the instinct to stay near the only protection it knew. The Alpha had come to get it back, and when it had arrived, something unexpected had happened. A human had stepped forward instead of running. Dara understood now. The whole picture. The snarl that wasn't purely aggression. The way the amber eyes had kept flicking, barely briefly, to the left of her position. The protein ration accepted not from hunger, but from something more complicated. Trust being tested in real time, under pressure, by an animal intelligent enough to run a calculation that looked something like, if this creature means harm, I will know before it reaches my young. She had passed the test without knowing she was taking it. She turned her head slowly toward the tree line. The juvenile froze. Dara reached into her jacket pocket, found the second protein ration she kept there. Always 2, always a habit from long postings in places where meals were unpredictable, and placed it on the ground to her left. Then she looked away, back at the Alpha, back at the ear she was scratching, giving the juvenile a way to approach without being watched, without pressure, without the unbearable vulnerability of being seen, wanting something. 30 seconds passed. She heard the soft, careful sound of 6 paws on wet ground, the rustle of a wrapper. Then something small and warm pressed briefly against her left boot, and was gone again. The Alpha made a low sound in its chest, not a snarl, something that felt, in the humid dark of the Kale 7 jungle, very much like acknowledgement. Word travels fast on a small base. By 0600, every off-duty soldier on Kale 7 knew what had happened at the perimeter. By 0800, Lieutenant Harwick had filed 3 separate incident reports, 2 of which he had deleted and rewritten because the original versions contained sentences he wasn't sure the military's reporting system had the appropriate category for. Sentences like, Sergeant Cole established non-hostile contact with a Class 9 apex predator through the application of ear scratches and protein rations. He filed it anyway. The Raveth came back the next night. Dara was ready. Same spot, same crouch posture, same 2 protein rations in her jacket pocket. She had also, after some thought, brought a third. The Alpha approached faster this time. 12 seconds from tree line to perimeter edge instead of 40. The calculation had already been run. The answer hadn't changed. The Juvenile came out of the trees before the ration even hit the ground. By the end of the first week, Harwick had stopped filing incident reports about it. Not because the situation had resolved, because it had normalized, which was somehow both better and significantly more concerning. The Raveth, both of them, arrived at the perimeter at roughly the same time each night with the calm punctuality of creatures that had decided this was simply part of their routine now. The Alpha would find Dara. The Juvenile would find whoever was standing closest to Dara with food. Private Reyes, who had spent the first night being absolutely certain he was about to watch his sergeant get eaten, was now voluntarily saving half his evening rations and approaching the Juvenile with the slightly manic enthusiasm of someone who has discovered an entirely new category of experience and cannot stop accessing it. It let me touch its ear, he told anyone who would listen. Don't, Harwick said. Both ears. Reyes. It made the sound, sir. The good sound. Harwick looked at Dara. Dara shrugged in a way that communicated volumes about personal responsibility and the limits of her authority over what other people did with their ration portions. The official trouble started on day 11. A conclave observation team arrived on Kale 7 for a routine base assessment. 3 xenobiologists and a diplomatic liaison landed via shuttle full of clipboards and professional confidence and the particular energy of people who have spent considerable time studying something from a safe distance and believe that qualifies them to explain it to everyone else. The lead xenobiologist's name was Dr. Vosperine. He was Drevethy. He had published 14 papers on Raveth behavior. He had never been within 2 kilometers of an actual Raveth, which he considered the correct professional distance, and had no plans to revise. He arrived at the base at 1400. By 1600, he had reviewed the incident reports. By 1700, he had requested an emergency briefing with Harwick. These reports, he said, setting his tablet down on the briefing table with the specific precision of someone who uses physical objects to express emotional states, are not possible. Harwick looked at him. I know. A wild Raveth establishing voluntary, repeated non-aggressive contact with humans. Perrine shook his head slowly. The species does not do this. The behavioral literature is unambiguous. They are solitary, territorial, and have demonstrated no capacity for interspecies social bonding of any kind. I know, Harwick said again. Then how? The base's perimeter alarm chimed softly. Not the urgent, multi-tone alert of a threat detection. The single, almost apologetic tone that the Night Watch had, sometime in the past week, quietly reprogrammed to mean something entirely different. It meant the Raveths were here. Harwick watched the understanding move across Perrine's face in slow, methodical stages, denial, confusion, recalibration, the way it moved across everyone's face the first time. Would you like to see it? Harwick asked. They stood at the perimeter edge in a line. Harwick, Perrine, the 2 junior xenobiologists, the diplomatic liaison. Dara in front, slightly apart, the way she always stood, not because she was trying to make a point, but because the Raveth had decided this was the correct spatial arrangement and enforced it with the quiet authority of something that does not negotiate geometry. The Alpha was already there, head pressed into Dara's hands. The Juvenile was working its way around Reyes with the focused determination of a creature that had learned exactly which pocket the rations came from and had opinions about how long the retrieval process was taking. Perrine said nothing for a very long time. Then he said, quietly almost to himself, it's not bonding with the base. It's bonding with her. Yes, Dara said. How? How? He stepped forward slightly. What did you do differently? Every documented human encounter with a wild Raveth has ended in either retreat or, I didn't treat it like a predator, Dara said simply. Perrine blinked. It is a predator. So, are we? She glanced at him briefly over her shoulder. Didn't stop you from talking to me. That night, Perrine sat in the base's small common room and began writing what would eventually become his 15th paper. His most cited one. The one that would quietly, permanently revise 14 years of established behavioral literature. He stared at his opening line for a long time before he wrote it. The error was not in our observation of the Raveth. The error was in our assumption that familiarity requires similarity. Outside, the jungle was dark and alive and full of sounds that the Kale 7 posting manual listed under threats, environmental. From somewhere near the perimeter, low and resonant and unmistakable, came the sound of something purring. The Conclave sent a containment order on day 15. Not a suggestion, not a recommendation. A formal, sealed, Priority 1 directive from the Galactic Wildlife Preservation and Threat Management Bureau, a name that managed to sound both protective and ominous simultaneously, which Dara suspected was entirely intentional. The order was 12 pages long. Page 1 was enough. All non-essential personnel are to maintain a minimum safe distance of 500 meters from any confirmed Raveth sighting. Established contact patterns are to be immediately discontinued. Containment and relocation of affected animals is authorized pending full behavioral assessment. Relocation. Dara read that word 3 times. Harwick called her into his office at 0700. He had the order on his desk and the expression of a man who had already fought the battle he was about to describe and lost it before she walked through the door. I know what you're going to say, he started. They want to relocate them. The Bureau's assessment team arrives in 4 days. Until then, Harwick. Her voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of controlled that is one layer above something much less controlled. That Juvenile is 6 months old, maybe 7. If they move the Alpha, it doesn't survive. I know that. Does the Bureau know that? He was quiet for a moment. Perrine's filing an objection. His paper is already circulating. There are people in the xenobiology community who are... For days, Dara said, the paper won't move fast enough. She left his office before he finished the sentence. She told the Alpha that night, not in words. She wasn't certain it understood words beyond the handful of tonal patterns it had started responding to. Her voice dropping low meant calm. A sharp exhale meant stop, a specific clicking sound she developed by accident on day 4 now reliably got the Juvenile's attention. But she told it anyway. The way you tell something important to a creature that matters to you, regardless of what they can or cannot parse from the sounds. She sat at the perimeter edge, the Alpha's enormous head in her lap, a development that had required its own separate incident report, and spoke quietly into the dark. The Juvenile was nearby. She could hear it investigating Reyes' boot with the focused attention it gave to anything it hadn't fully categorized yet. They're coming to move you, she said. The Alpha's amber eyes found her face. I'm not going to let that happen. She paused. I don't have a plan yet, but I don't need one yet. The plan arrived at 0200 in the form of an encrypted message from Dr. Perrine. She almost missed it. She'd been at the perimeter until midnight and had fallen asleep at her desk with her jacket still on. The alert pulled her up from a dream that dissolved instantly, leaving only the residue of urgency. She read the message twice. Perrine had done something unexpected, something that, for a Drevethy academic with 14 published papers and a professional reputation built on careful, measured, peer-reviewed caution, was almost uncharacteristically bold. He had contacted the Cerity Institute of Interspecies Relations. He had sent them 48 hours of perimeter footage, every interaction, every approach, every moment of the Alpha reading Dara's posture and making its calculations and choosing repeatedly to stay. And he had attached a note. This is not a containment situation. This is a first contact situation. I am requesting immediate reclassification under the Interspecies Voluntary Engagement Protocol. The Voluntary Engagement Protocol. Dara sat up straight. She knew that protocol. Everyone in the Conclave's diplomatic corps knew it. It was the provision that stated that if a non-sapient species demonstrated voluntary, repeated, unsolicited engagement with another species, not captured, not conditioned, not contained, that engagement was legally classified as a protected interspecies relationship. It couldn't be relocated. It couldn't be contained. It had to be studied, preserved, respected. Perrine had found the door. She grabbed her comm and called him immediately. He answered on the second signal, which told her he had been awake and waiting. The footage, she said. Will it be enough? A pause. Careful. Measured. Very Raveth-y. It should be, he said. But the assessment team arrives in 4 days and the reclassification process takes 5. He let that sit for a moment. We need 1 more day. Dara looked at the time. Then, at the perimeter feed on her secondary screen, where the alpha was a large, still shape at the tree line, amber eyes catching the light, watching the base, watching for her. I'll handle the assessment team, she said. Another pause. Longer this time. Sergeant Cole, Perrine said carefully, when you say handle, professionally, she said. She wasn't entirely sure that was true. The assessment team landed at 0900 on day 19. 4 of them. Bureau uniforms. Matching cases of containment equipment that they carried with the confidence of people who had never once been told their equipment wasn't going to be necessary. Dara met them at the landing pad. She was professional. Completely. Impeccably. She gave them the full base tour, answered every question with precise, documented detail, and walked them through 11 days of behavioral data with the calm efficiency of someone who had spent the previous 72 hours preparing for exactly this conversation. She also walked very slowly. Every stop on the tour lasted slightly longer than it needed to. Every data set required just a little more contextual explanation. Every question was answered thoroughly, completely, and with the addition of relevant supplementary information that was genuinely useful and also genuinely time-consuming. The team lead, a Vorith named Assessor Drell, narrow-shouldered, markings cycling in the focused green of professional concentration, noticed by hour 3. Sergeant, he said carefully, we do have a timeline. Absolutely, Dara said. I just want to make sure you have everything you need to make the right decision. She handed him another folder. The reclassification came through at 1347 on day 20. Perrine sent her the confirmation with no message attached, just the official conclave seal and 4 words in the subject line. Protected. Effective immediately. VP. She read it standing at the perimeter edge. The sun was dropping toward the jungle canopy, turning the cloud cover amber and gold, filling the base with a particular late afternoon light that made even Kale 7 look briefly, accidentally beautiful. She heard the tree line move, right on schedule. The alpha came out of the jungle and crossed to her in 12 seconds. A record. It pressed its head into her hands with the total unselfconscious commitment it brought to everything. No hesitation, no performance, just the simple fact of a creature that had made a decision and saw no reason to keep reconsidering it. The Juvenile appeared a moment later. It had grown. Noticeably, visibly, in the 3 weeks since the night it had pressed briefly against her boot and disappeared into the dark. It was less hesitant now, less invisible. It moved with the early, unsteady drafts of a confidence that would, in time, become something formidable. It went directly to Reyes. Reyes made a sound that was embarrassingly close to a sob and immediately started checking his pockets. Assessor Drell stood 10 meters back and watched all of it with the careful, recalibrating attention of someone updating a very large internal document in real time. His markings had shifted from professional green to something slower, more thoughtful. He stayed for 2 hours past his scheduled departure. When he finally left, he paused beside Dara at the landing pad. In 11 years of wildlife assessment, he said, I have never filed a reclassification recommendation on the same trip as a containment order. First time for everything, Dara said. He looked at her for a moment, then at the tree line, then back. What did you do? He asked, not accusatory, genuinely, quietly curious. In that first moment, When it snarled, "What made you step forward instead of back?" Dara thought about it, about her grandfather's yard and the strays that came in bristling, about 600 kilograms of apex predator and one protein ration, and a juvenile hiding in the tree line, waiting to see what happened next, about the simple, persistent, unreasonable human instinct to move toward the thing that everyone else is moving away from. "It looked like it needed something," she said finally. Drell absorbed that for a long moment. Then he picked up his case, walked up the ramp, and filed the most unusual report of his career on the way home. The Alpha lived near the base for another 4 years. The Juvenile, larger now, less uncertain, with the slow-building presence of something the jungle was learning to make room for, eventually ranged further, wider, the way young things do when the world starts to feel survivable. But it came back, regularly, reliably, with the quiet punctuality of something that had learned early and completely that there was a place at the edge of the perimeter lights where a human would be standing, and the human would have something in her pocket, and nothing that approached honestly would be turned away. Reyes made colonel eventually. He kept rations in his uniform pocket for the rest of his career. Nobody ever asked why. Dr. Perrine's 15th paper was titled Voluntary Interspecies Engagement and the Misclassification of Apex Predator Sociality, a case study from Kale 7. It was cited 3,400 times in the first year alone. His opening line became, quietly, one of the most repeated sentences in xenobiology. The error was not in our observation of Raveth. The error was in our assumption that familiarity requires similarity. He never published a 16th paper. He spent the next decade on Kale 7 instead, and somewhere in the deep jungle of a moon that the Conclave had classified as hostile, dangerous, and not recommended for extended human habitation, an apex predator that 14 years of behavioral literature had described as incapable of interspecies social bonding raised its young in the knowledge that the perimeter lights meant safety. Not because it had been tamed, not because it had been contained, because one human had stepped forward instead of back, and everything that followed had simply been the consequence of that.